Hello and welcome to this first edition of Kyte Talks. Yes, this is the first of a series of such talks that on various subjects that we plan on sharing with you throughout the year. The subject of today's talk is the new EU regulation called DORA. There has been a lot of interest in recent months, especially with the launch date getting closer. And rather than spending the time to discuss and provide like an exhaustive list of requirements that this regulation mandates, I thought it makes a lot of sense to spend the time to discuss the impact that this regulation is having on companies and how companies are approaching the subject of compliance. My name is 𝗚𝗏𝗧. I'm the director at Kyte Global. I have with me three guests, and I'll proceed to introduce them. Stefan Gallia, the Senior Vice President of IT Infrastructure and Information Security at Finbank. Malcolm Portelli, Chief Information Security Officer at Andaria. And finally, Roderick Vella, who's the Head of IT Audit here at Kyte. And he's responsible for DORA compliance within his portfolio of clients. So I suppose the first question and the obvious one, I would say, what are the general perceptions within the financial sector out there with respect to the requirements and how people are expecting to comply to these? We had a similar situation, or we were in a similar situation a few years back with the introduction of GDPR, which, as we know, came and has gone. Well, it's still with us, but we know the journey that has been. So we can draw some comparisons, but in general, how would you compare the sentiment out there with regards to the industry and amongst your peers as well?
From my perspective, it's a good comparison to draw DORA with GDPR. Well, DORA, I mean, most of the stuff in DORA, from my perspective, is nothing new. It's all stuff that is out there for people in the information security community. People in the business community, maybe not as much. So this kind of brings a lot of stuff that we've been working on from an information security perspective to the forefront from a business perspective. Just like GDPR did for data protection.
Yeah, in fact, we'll be talking about this later on with regards to the similarities between other standards as well. And as you said, yes, some of the requirements should not really be surprising, but some others might. What do you think, Stefan?
Yes, if you have sound security programs and sound risk management, DORA will be a continuation of your program and an opportunity to improve. Not unlike GDPR itself, but some market differences that we can discuss later when we come to the question.
Yeah. Any one specific requirement that is bothering you, worrying you, or in some way you think it's going to be difficult to implement?
I think true third-party risk management is going to be a challenge because there are a lot of different angles that you need to look at when you're dealing with third parties, service providers, any third party really. And to get all the angles right, I think is going to be a challenge for businesses in general.
I agree that that's a very important and resource-taking element that will require cooperation with your third parties that you're dealing with and their third parties, so it ramifies a lot. There's also, I think, a strong element of internal resources that you need to allocate to be sure that you're compliant. That's also something that one needs to think about in the short to medium and longer term.
Yeah. Rod, I promised I won't get into the list of requirements, but we do need to get into some of the, let's say, the more important ones. So what would you consider to be the key requirements and those that should be high on the priority, let's say?
So apart from third-party risk management, which you have already mentioned, definitely there's ICT-related incident management, which is not just having a documented process, but also a properly managed and tested process in place. ICT risk management, we mentioned it before. It's an ongoing process. I mean, I think risk management is a journey in itself. So you always learn and always try to improve yourself and the company, of course, to make the processes better and help the company eliminate any risks which are occurring along the way in our day-to-day work. Of course, digital operation resilience testing, frequent testing of BCP and the business continuity plan and disaster recovery planning. And I think the last one is the most a bit confusing at the moment for many out there, which is threat-led penetration testing, which I believe more information will be also communicated by the authority in the coming months ahead.
You all have mentioned the third-party risk management. One of the first things that comes to mind when I think about how these third parties need to be managed are the contractual agreements in place. Are we saying that there might be situations where contracts have to be, let's say, renegotiated with suppliers?
It's a question I think that needs to be answered more from the entity's perspective more than DORA, in the sense that if your contract does not really cover your backside, if I may, properly from a contractual point of view with regards to what the service provider will do to safeguard your data, to safeguard the bank or whatever entity it is that they're working with, and to manage the risks on your behalf, notwithstanding that they're still your responsibility. Yes, there may need to be conversations about compliance as well, if nothing else. It gives an additional edge to the entity with regards to the service provider, who now needs also to be able to ensure that their customers comply. So they cannot really be away or deviate too much from these practices.
Yeah, actually, on the same subject, we come across this as well with us performing various audits. And I can already see a bit of potentially issues with regards to when you are expecting certain monitoring, certain contractual obligations, especially with SaaS providers, with those huge entities that provide service to the masses, where you need to approach maybe a little bit the situation in a different way, right? You're not going to be able to negotiate any contractual agreement that you want because these are set. You won't be able to dictate how certain controls are implemented or how the service is provided. So that's something we come across in our audits sometimes, and I suppose it will always feature within the risk assessment of that company. All right, and
if I may, the regulators have a keen focus on concentration risk with these massive providers, who I guess it's a very tough conversation, but at the end of the day, it's a case of service providers understanding what risks that they need to cater for, and there's all the scrutiny from within various industries to understand what regulated entities are subject to. So while it's the case that I will never be able to go to Microsoft and twist their arm to change my contract, at the same time, Microsoft and similar peer organizations of that size are already making themselves, preparing themselves to be able to comply to this kind of regulation of the BET.
I think DORA is building up on the EBA guidelines on outsourcing as well. So I think financial services entities were already prepared in such a way, since it's been a couple of years now since banks and any other company operating within the financial services sector had to implement such guidelines. So it's nothing new as such. It's just formalizing and building on the process.
Yeah, and I think an important thing on this kind of points we're bringing up is that DORA doesn't just affect financial services providers, it affects their providers, so
As well.
it's something that they need to keep an eye on as well. So from a contractual perspective, they also need to start looking at what am I going to do to better serve my customers who might be financial services companies.
And something worth mentioning as well, some of these large providers, first of all, it has to be said that they're typically compliant and certified in most of the information security standards out there, right? So ISO, PCI, and a bunch of others. But what they do quite well, some of them, they publish on their website a list of what we call a responsibility matrix. So they indicate what they're responsible for and what the customers are going to be responsible for, so that there is no misunderstanding and no gaps in compliance as far as what you're expecting your provider to be doing for you and what they are telling you that is your responsibility, right? And this document, which typically is a public document, is very useful. And we encourage usually our clients to, to have a look at this document, so that at no point are you expecting that some of these controls are implemented for you, when in actual fact they should be handled in-house, so that's one thing. Roderick, you mentioned before some significant emphasis on testing itself. So entities are not only required to implement certain controls, but now we're also saying some of these controls have to be tested regularly. Again, we're talking about operation resilience, so it makes sense that the controls have to be tested to ensure they actually function as needed. But and I refer more specifically to penetration testing, incident response testing and simulation, and BCP, DRP testing. What can you say about, let's say, these testing requirements, which again may or may not have been common practice already?
Well, I believe such testing was already in place. However, this time DORA is enforcing such testing to be carried out. So it's important for a company to test its incident response and incident management process to ensure that if a real incident happens, the company is formed and the company's processes are formed in a way to react properly, in a timely manner and efficiently, to minimize the impact on its operations. The same goes for business continuity planning and disaster recovery testing. So if such testing is carried out regularly and as it should, of course the company is enhancing its operational resilience to react properly in case an event really happens.
Yeah. You mentioned incident response, and that's one area where we're also seeing companies opting for outsourcing that. I don't want to jump the gun because we have questions specifically on that, but yeah, incident response sometimes might be hard to have in-house because of the resources, the skills that are necessary. So sometimes it makes a lot of sense to let's say rely on professional support. We agree, I suppose. Okay, with regards to, there's a sense of urgency right now with regards to companies that should start getting themselves ready, right? It's the deadline is not tomorrow, it's still quite a few months, but we've also seen even the regulator, the MFSA in the case is the regulator here in Malta in charge of enforcing and introducing DORA, right? And it is mandating on all of its licensees to start getting themselves prepared, start getting the necessary gap analysis in place, working on also the remediation aspects. And they've given a deadline of September of this year to start showing the results of those activities, right? Are we on time? Do you think, based on what you are doing yourselves within your own companies, are we in time to meet the deadline of January of next year for the expected, let's say, launch?
I mean, I can only speak for myself, but from our perspective, I think we're lucky in the sense that a lot of the processes like that even we've already touched on, we had in place. Now it's just a matter of enhancing, but it all depends on the company. I mean, obviously the size of the company will dictate the size, and the agility of the company will dictate how fast they can get everything in line. But it's not tomorrow, but it's soon. I mean, there's not long left. So if companies haven't started thinking about it now, then they should really start starting their engines and getting going.
Stefan, same?
Pretty much. It depends on where you're starting off from, as we were saying before. Given that non-compliance is not an option if you plan to continue to operate as a business in this regulated environment, it's never really too late to get yourself in line. So you need to start to invest if you haven't yet. And if you have to continue to keep your engines in motion, as Malcolm was saying.
Yeah. And I think at regulator level, I think they're doing the right thing to. I mean, enforcement is obviously one of their tasks, right? But also the educational aspect. So the fact that there is a plan how they're introducing and hoping that everyone's complying, again, probably with lessons learned from the GDPR process, we think, and we've seen a lot of interest in how companies are starting to get themselves compliant. And it's going to be interesting towards the end of the year. So some are going to have a very busy Christmas period, probably. Okay, we spoke before about the fact that you were, to a certain extent, already kind of prepared. So this is like reaffirming what you need to do, and maybe, improve a little bit on the controls. But if I take you back in terms of strategy, right? What specific strategy or best practice would you recommend, let's say, based on your experience or maybe based on lessons learned, in terms of being ready, as far as being ready for the DORA compliance?
If I had to mention two things, I think it would be, firstly, start with a gap assessment, and closely linked to that is rope in all the people in the organization that are responsible for the different areas that the 5 pillars touch on as early as possible in the day, so that there's a comprehensive strategy that is organization-wide and that is not just an individual's to manage.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think an internal working group is an important first step. You get to know all stakeholders, so risk, compliance, security, tech. And I would also say getting your workforce ready, in the sense that making them aware of what's coming in all the teams that DORA may be applicable to. So that's another thing, apart from the gap assessment, is definitely something that needs to be done.
We mentioned before, and I don't want to repeat, but I want to maybe reinforce the importance of this. We talked about the key challenges, let's say, with regards to outsourcing, right? It is understandable, and it's in many ways a common practice that companies would outsource their IT, their internal audit, customer support, whatever. But the regulator, and not just the industry in general, the regulator continue to see this, the outsourcing part as high risk, right? In short, because we already touched on this subject, but what's the fuss about? Why all this this importance on, which is again one of the pillars, let's say, when it comes to DORA?
I think there was a lot of fuss on outsourcing, there still is, and the reason why they're trying to do this third-party risk management is to kind of cover the again, this is my opinion on it, but to kind of cover the outsourcing area. When you're outsourcing, there is added risk to the organization, but in this day and age, outsourcing is a requirement. It's very difficult to do business if you cannot outsource certain functions to other companies who are experts in the field. You cannot be an expert in everything. So hopefully this implementation of third-party risk management from a DORA perspective will make outsourcing a bit more feasible and a bit less of a risk from the regulator's perspective.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's one of the key elements, which is very important, in fact, is key performance indicators to assess the performance of your vendor, and where necessary, you act to improve anything which is going wrong. So I think implementing such KPIs will help the companies as well to perform better.
On the flip side of this, right? So in terms now of not outsourcing your key functions, but outsourcing for complying to DORA, right? Which is not the outsourcing we're talking about. So companies obviously are definitely going to look towards their consultant suppliers for support. Hopefully that's not a regulated function, no? We won't be in that basket. But any services which you think might be well suited, let's say, for companies to outsource in terms of them achieving compliance?
Again, it depends, I think, on where you are at. There's definitely areas of testing that can be held through third-party expertise. As Malcolm was saying, you can't be expected to know everything. You can't go it alone. It would be foolish to think so, even if you're a large bank, let alone if you're a smaller organization. So testing with experts who can actually provide assurance that you're doing things right will always be something that is definitely highly outsourceable, even if it complements in some percentage the efforts that you do in-house.
Yeah. Okay. Again, we touched on it briefly before, but there is obviously an overlap between what DORA is mandating from companies and what other industry standards have always been pretty much requiring, right? So I always use ISO 27001 as the basis for pretty much every information security standard. And you could see a lot of similarities there and overlap. So what would you think in terms of this overlap, and how should companies be looking at complying to DORA, complying to ISO 27001, or leveraging what they've already done with regards to ISO 27001, and of course making sure that they achieve compliance to DORA? So
while, as we mentioned before, companies were already in a way prepared, and yes, they have a better processes in place if they have such certifications. So while ISO 27001 provides a valuable foundation for DORA compliance, however, it's not enough. since
And we're talking about ISO 27000. Of course, there are many more.
of course.
And some might not be compliant to ISO. They might be compliant to PCI, for example, which again is based on ISO. They could have been, again, not subject to a PCI certification, but to a SOC 2 certification, which again mandates a lot of the common requirements. But
such certifications usually give a broad risk management framework, while DORA has specific requirements. So if looking at penetration testing or business continuity planning, DORA enforces the frequency when you are conducting such testing. Such standards usually requires the company to have a plan in place and actually implement it. So DORA this time, it's making companies test their processes more frequently.
yeah.
One of the strengths, I think, depending on which side of the table you are on. I mean, if you have to implement it, then it becomes a challenge. But one of the key differences, I think, in DORA is that there are various technical standards that you need to follow, and they are pretty well defined. So if you have no idea of what to do, technical standards are already showing you what you should be doing, and they are pretty prescriptive in some cases.
And within your companies, let's say within the environment of a bank, because we mentioned framework, have you looked at DORA in isolation in terms of the requirements and see what you already have? You mentioned gap analysis and how you tackle it, or you've included DORA as yet another compliance obligation that you managed to fit into a, let's say, compliance framework, so bank-wide, as opposed to looking at individual compliance obligations?
There is definitely the compliance shadow, let's call it, of not being able to meet the requirements that the regulators are putting, both on the local and the EU level. But more than that, it is about sound risk management practices and a good security program and all that comes with that. BCP, testing, and all the rest. Incident management, your incident response capabilities, how well you're prepared, how well the rest of the organization is prepared, culture. It's all of that. So really and truly, it's more about augmenting what you're doing if you're not doing enough, probably from a compliance point of view.
No, I agree. I mean, we're not a bank, but obviously we need to abide by it anyway. But it's security best practice is security best practice. What DORA does is it imposes it to a certain level for all financial institutions and their providers. So if you're already doing well from a security perspective, the kind of barrier to entry for DORA compliance is small. Not small, but it's smaller. So what's good about DORA, and I mean DORA is not all doom and gloom, there's good sides, is shining a light on the importance of risk management, the importance of information security and all of these things in an organization. So,
and it must be said as well that DORA is now applicable to entities that previously, I mean, we all know if you're a bank, you have to comply with a bunch of different regulations. You are audited almost every other day. So that is quite obvious. But DORA now is forcing certain other entities which fall within the scope of DORA compliance that previously were, let's say, notorious for not taking information security seriously. So at least the intention here is to achieve some sort of a benchmark in terms of security across the industry. So last question, and very quickly, if we had to look, let's say 2 years from now, the implementation and, well, DORA would have come in, we should have been compliant, some might have not. What are your expectations 2 years from now? What will be the situation with regards to the acceptance and implementation of DORA within the industry as a whole?
before we mentioned GDPR, and today it's accepted that you build in privacy by design, that you're taking care of data protection, that you're not keeping data longer than you should, and it's part and parcel of what we do every day. We're doing things properly, and it will be the same for everyone, whether they're already at the forefront with a good security program, or whether they're let's say they're struggling and they haven't yet started, but they'll need to be more or less in line. Of course, it's about culture as well at the end of the day, with how well you adopt it and whether you're just ticking a box. Ticking a box is risky because the regulator will probably not be happy with just the checkbox.
2 years from now?
I agree. I mean, we saw the same thing with GDPR. And as well, DORA is focused on EU. I see it spreading kind of like GDPR did, in the sense that other jurisdictions will see it as a good template for operational resilience. So that's how I see it going. I would imagine 2 years from now, some companies might not be fully compliant, but as was the case with GDPR, but the majority will be in a good standing, I think.
Very good. Guys, thank you very much for this chat. It was very interesting, and it makes me look forward to our second, let's say, chat, which is coming up very soon. Once again, thank you for being here, and yeah, thank you for watching.